Welcome once again to Cinemaholics from the San Francisco Bay Area. I am John Negroni, chief editor of Cinemaholics.com, and I also write for The Young Folks, The Spool, and Awards Watch. From Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, he is a pop culture writer for Cinema Blend, and he also writes for Cinemaholics.com. It's Will Ashton.
Hello.
And from Kansas City, Missouri, she is a freelance writer and film editor for The Pitch magazine. Her bylines include RogerEbert.com/film, Crooked Marquee, and an embarrassing tattoo. It's Abby Olchesi.
Hello.
You can find more episodes of Cinemaholics. By the way, the tattoo is on me. I should make that clear. You can find more episodes of Cinemaholics, including our full archive, on Cinemaholics.com, including written reviews and other bonus content. You can write into the show anytime by sending us an email, which is cinemaholicspodcast@gmail.com. If you'd like to support this podcast and help us keep the fun going, please head on over to patreon.com/cinemaholics and maybe consider becoming one of our patrons. We also have Cinemaholics merch you can purchase on our website, cinemaholics.com. So get yourself a hoodie, a mug, t-shirt, shot glass, whatever you like. Links to everything I just mentioned are in the show notes as per usual. I should be even more clear. I do not have a tattoo. I'm probably making it sound like I'm way cooler than I am, but no. Okay, so lots to get into. Will, Abby, first off, for off topics, we have a new extra milestone coming out this week. The Silence of the Lambs is celebrating its 30th anniversary. I'm assuming you two are fans of the movie. I don't think we've ever really talked about it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I love Silence of the Lambs. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I do have the fancy Criterion Blu-ray that I scored a while back and still need to watch. So that's a good reminder that I need to put that in my player here sometime soon.
Yeah, likewise. I am a big fan. I haven't seen it, like Abby said, in a good bit, but I remember really liking it when I saw it in high school, and I am overdue for a rewatch for sure.
I'll be talking about the movie with Julia Tatey on Extra Milestone later this week. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and yeah, keep your eyes peeled for that episode. So we do have some voicemails to get to. We have a new question, new topic we raised to all of you, the listeners, and we're going to do another two-parter because that worked pretty well. We got some voicemails, and splitting it up week to week seems to help keep it a little bit short, which is great. But our voicemail question this week is: do you prefer, for TV shows, do you prefer new episodes released all at once, or do you like the week-to-week format? So like right now, we've been watching, Abby and I have been watching like WandaVision. Will has not watched an episode yet. He's still considering, how to explain to people why he's not going to watch it. But yeah, between shows like WandaVision, Mandalorian, we still get week-to-week movies or shows. But, there's still the Netflix binge model that people really like, where you get the entire season all at once. Just this past week, watched Behind Her Eyes. It's 6 episodes, watched the whole thing. So we wanted to turn over to the listeners. Like, what do you actually prefer? Does it depend on the show? And if it depends on the type of show, what is it you look for? First, let's turn it over to you, Abby. What's your preference?
That's a good question. I think it kind of depends based on the show format. I don't mind having a week to week thing. Like I look forward to having Mandalorian episodes to look forward to every Friday when that's on. I've been enjoying having new episodes of WandaVision to enjoy in the same way. However, I think given the nature of that show and kind of what it's become, it wouldn't surprise me if it might do slightly better as a full binge. Maybe in the future I would consider like going back and rewatching all the episodes beginning to end to see if it holds together a little bit better. I know, John, you and I have been talking about how the length is kind of an issue with that show too, given the story that it's trying to tell. But yeah, I guess the response that I have is that it kind of depends. If it's a limited narrative that takes place within the space of a single season, I like to be able to watch that at my own pace. But if it's something that is a little more kind of different week to week with maybe an overall arc, that I don't mind having the traditional weekly format.
Yeah, we were talking about this off the air, but I think it does work for a show like Mandalorian, maybe to your point there, because it's episodic. It feels like every week was a big spectacle, whereas with WandaVision, it just sort of feels like the week is interrupting the story before the story really gets going. And so, yeah, I just genuinely don't think it's working for WandaVision really well. It's like the episodes are ending and I feel pretty dissatisfied every week. Not in a way that I dislike the show, but just in a way where like I just wish that I could get some closure on anything that's happening.
I like episodic TV. I don't really watch a lot of TV in general. As we are a Cinemaholics podcast, I tend to watch films more often than not. But I don't know. There is something to be valued, I think, in an episodic television format where you can kind of look forward to something each given week. I tend to prefer it for like comedies or something that's not too plot driven, because then you don't have to like, kind of like build up all these different fan theories and be either let down or like taken askew in some way. But I don't know. I don't mind the weekly format, but like I said, I don't really watch a lot of TV, so maybe my mileage varies compared to other people, but that's what I feel.
Fair enough. Well, let's turn it over to the listeners. We got a few voicemails on this. We're going to play 2 of them this week and then maybe a couple more next week. But here is what Bowie had to say.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm going to have to be really honest with myself in this conversation. And I have to say that I wish I was someone that preferred week to week, because I feel like that's much more, balanced. There are better boundaries around it. But if I am being honest with myself, I am very much someone that when I like a show, I want to binge it. I want to get completely lost in that world. I want to feel kind of sick and divorced from reality. None of these are good things. I'm aware of it. But I just love that experience of feeling totally immersed and like I just don't want to stop watching it. Now, do I do that with every show? No. There are some shows that maybe are heavier or more stressful that I do think I prefer week to week, or I will purposely choose to watch it with a friend or someone else so that I'm only watching it an episode or 2 at a time. So a good example of that from my life recently has been Euphoria. Now, I found those episodes really stressful, and I definitely could have binged it, but probably would have felt like sort of, I can't even imagine. I think just stressed out by the end. So I was really happy when a friend decided to watch that show with me, and we just took it an episode or 2 at a time. That really worked for me. But for something like, say, for example, Sex Education on Netflix, it's so light and funny and fun. Now, I couldn't binge every season of that episode of that series in one sitting, obviously, but I definitely did have periods of binging with that show. And I was so grateful that I did not have to wait week after week just to get to the next episode. Because sometimes, honestly, it's kind of a drag. And I don't think every episode or every show lends itself to the week by week model anymore, actually.
All right. So that was from Bowie. And I agree with so much of that. Like, I find myself not wanting to wait week to week unless it's a very specific type of show. Like specifically Sex Education was a good example of that. And just watching it behind her eyes, it's like, that's not a show. Like if it was coming out to week, I would have watched the first episode and then forgotten about it. And then, I wouldn't have had that same anticipation. It's kind of weird and it's a little sad almost, because it's so different from like back in the day. You used to wait every week for shows that I didn't even like that much, like Arrow, for example, like stuff on the CW. I would wait week to week because you're so used to that. And the Netflix model has totally changed that. One more voicemail here. This is from Seeking Plum. Let's see what she has to say.
There are some shows, I can't think of something off the top of my head, but I know that when they release the entire season and I'm obsessed with it, then I sort of have to take it slow because I want to savor it and I want to make it last. Of course, it's all relative, right? Because maybe I do 2 episodes one day, 2 the next day, and before you know it, by the end of the weekend, I've already finished it. So it's all relative. But something else that can work in some shows and not in others, I think is I first started watching Billions when there were already several seasons out. And so you could see the nuances and the threads and how it flowed together, the character development, and I loved it. I ate it up. But when I had to start watching it week to week, it lost something for me. And so I think that once the next so many episodes are out, then I'll watch it. I'm not going to watch it week to week because it's going to drive me nuts. The other thing that I think, too, is that is a defining factor, I guess, is continuity between not so much the things you see, set design or where the wound is on someone. Of course, those things bug me, but the continuity of plot points, this bugged me when I watched Bones last year when I was binging those seasons. Something tragic and terrible would happen in one episode, but then you go to the next episode and it's as if none of that ever happened. Not just in the plot itself, but the characters seem to have lost, the development that happened through that tragic incident. And it would drive me nuts. And it wasn't like one time. It was like you could tell all of these episodes were being written by different people and produced by different people, and they weren't hanging on to some of those threads. And I suppose if you're seeing from week to week, then you're not going to notice some of those things, or you're not really going to care because it's not necessarily this gripping, detailed drama of some kind, And sometimes that's just what's needed. So I don't know. As you said, it sort of depends on the show. And I think it also depends on, what you're looking for yourself.
All right. Thank you, Seeking Plum, for your take on that. And actually, yeah, that voicemail reminded me in something that I want to bring up with you, Abby, since you're experiencing this with WandaVision. There was this episode that came out. We're not going to give anything away, of course, but there was like this reveal on WandaVision, and I just remember a lot of people, myself included to an extent, were like, oh, well, yeah, that's so predictable. We knew that was going to happen weeks ago. But I think the reason a lot of people saw it coming is because we had weeks and weeks of like speculation. People are watching videos and reading theories, and it wasn't that big. It wasn't that hard of a twist to figure out, right? Is that how you felt?
I think I'd had it not completely spoiled for me, but like enough things were trending on Twitter that by the time that I got to the episode and things started to seem like they might be going a certain way, I was like, oh yeah, I can see this coming now. And yeah, I wonder if maybe had I binged all of that very quickly, if that might not have been, I don't know, if I might not have picked up on that as quickly, or kind of how that would have gone. I do think that the way that particular reveal happened was pretty delightful, and I was really happy when it did. But yeah, it wasn't terribly surprising.
Right. Yeah. I think we have to balance it with like, of course, some things are going to be predictable when we're spending every week obsessed with the show. Like people are just going to call it, like with Game of Thrones. Like a lot of the big twists in that show were known for years, like decades even, because of the books. So it's just one of those things, I think, where, if you can choose to be fully immersed in a show, and then you kind of control how much you want to be entertained by it, which I guess that means, Will Ashton, you're the wisest among all of us. You're just staying out of it completely. So you can just binge it, and then, it's all going to be new to you someday.
Yeah, I mean, what I imagine is going to happen is that in 5 or 10 years, I'm finally going to check out this WandaVision show. And then I'm going to reach out to my friends, John and Abby, and be like, hey, I just got to the season 1 finale of WandaVision. I couldn't believe so-and-so happened. And you two are going to be like, what are you talking about?
You're alive?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
I will also say that I feel like, particularly in WandaVision's case, that it's kind of a hard sell, like from the beginning couple of episodes as a weekly show. I had a conversation with my parents a couple of weeks ago, just like at their house, and they were like, "What is this WandaVision thing?" And my mom seemed actively angry. Like she'd tried to watch it, and it seemed like a Dick Van Dyke type show, which the first couple of episodes do. And she was completely turned off by that. And I was like, there's a larger plot, you have to wait. But then also thinking, well, yeah, I mean, I got through the first couple of episodes because they were provided to critics. So I kind of feel like I jumped in at the point where it was just starting to get good. But yeah, it does take a while. And I wonder, again, if that had been dumped on everybody all at once, if maybe that might have been a slightly easier sell. But again, not sure.
I mean, for me, I feel like I was more interested in the idea that was at the beginning, which is that it's going to be kind of like a pache of different sitcoms, kind of use that as a character piece for Wanda and her grief. And then now that's this other thing. From what I've heard, it's not that enticing to me. So I feel like I'm in the opposite. And with your parents, where what I've been hearing about since then has been less enticing than what it was in the begining. But like I said, I haven't seen the show, so maybe I'll disagree when I watch it. But that's where I'm at. Yeah,
because it's definitely still that format you're referring to. It's just, it just depends. I'm not sure how you're going to, appreciate it or not. Abby, that same exact thing is happening with people I know who were watching the show, and they just, they were like, what is this? The first 2 episodes were available. And I know a few people who wrote the show off, but later on, like word of mouth did start to build where people were like, no. It's kind of like with Parks and Recreation almost, where it's like you kind of have to get through the first couple episodes if they're not for you. Eventually the show becomes like this bigger thing, and it's become like a big phenomenon of a show. So at this point, I think people are now like really getting into it and watching it and putting up with the early episodes that they might not like as much and are now invested. So I think it still works. It's just confusing, I think, how they decided to release it the way they did. I guess when it just in terms of like the big spoilers of everything, I'm not convinced they're at a point where there's these surprises that are, I don't know, earth shattering. There's been like one big twist, and then I feel like since then it's been a little disappointing. But you know what, Abby, we're gonna have our WandaVision conversation. Like once the season ends, we're probably going to do a whole thing, you and me, and we'll talk it all out, spoilers and everything. But for now, I guess we can talk about some reviews, some things that are out right now that we probably want to talk about. So one of them, go ahead.
That I have seen.
Will has seen. In fact, we'll start with that. Will, you saw a movie that I think is all about you because it's called Willy's Wonderland. So is this your biopic?
No, unfortunately not. This is the new Nicolas Cage film, which, I guess if it's a film called Willy's Wonderland and it stars Nicolas Cage, you would think it is my thing, and I wish it was. So this is the new horror film based, I believe, on the short film called Willy's Wonderland, or that might have just been the original title for this film until some copyrights interrupted that from happening. But yeah, basically the premise of the film is very simple. It's Nicolas Cage is a silent janitor who gets a job at this worn down sort of like Chuck E. Cheese type place where there are the creepy animatronics around, and he basically has a night to clean up the whole place because they're trying to reopen it and spark the business up again. But as Nicolas Cage is cleaning up the joint, the animatronics are coming to life and attacking him, and he has to basically fend for himself throughout one crazy evening. And if you're thinking to yourself, hey, that sounds a lot like Five Nights at Freddy, you're basically right, because that's pretty much what they copy and pasted this from, not discreetly, but alas, I think the movie itself, it's getting kind of a bad rap because I think people were expecting it to be a lot, I guess, goofier than it is, or maybe a little bit more consistently zany. But for me, I didn't hate it that much. I think it's self-aware enough to where it provides those kind of zany, goofy moments with Nicolas Cage. But I didn't really find a lot of them to be super organic. It felt like a movie that's kind of trying to appeal to the ironic Nicolas Cage fan as opposed to actually being that entertaining or that unique or that scary. It doesn't really provide a consistent amount of laughs, and it's never really scary throughout. So you just kind of have to deal with a lot of, kind of goofy Nicolas Cage moments while, watching him beat up these living animatronics that may or may not be the work of Satan, which, describing the film, I think makes it sound more entertaining than it ultimately is. It's just a kind of stretched out 80-something minute horror comedy type thing with Nicolas Cage, admirably doing a acting challenge, which is basically, not speaking, not having any of his like typical kind of freak out moments where he gets to, scream at the top of his lungs and do whatever else you might expect from a Z-grade Nicolas Cage movie. But in this one, as much as I admire him for stretching his talents and trying to do something like that, I don't really think the movie itself really gives him a lot to do. It just basically relies on him kind of doing what he can with a script that's mostly drawn out and not really that enticing, other than what Nicolas Cage brings to the table. So I'd give it like a low C+, because like I said, I didn't dislike the experience of watching the film necessarily. It's fun for like a, night out with my friends. And, if I, had an opportunity to see us with them in theaters, I think we would have had a decent bit of fun. But as it was, watching it on VOD with them, it was, not the worst way to spend an evening, but ultimately I didn't really get a whole lot out of this compared to some other Nicolas Cage movies. So that's what it was.
Yeah, it's a shame to hear that. I know you were looking forward to it. But yeah, I also saw something called The Violent Heart. And I hadn't even heard of this. And I think, Will, you said you had never heard of it when I mentioned it to you. Abby, was this on your radar at all? It just kind of came out of nowhere?
No, this one's new to me.
Okay, yeah. It came out and it got, its reviews and everything. It's just, what a weird year. But yeah, The Violent Heart, it's the, I think, fourth film from Karim Sanga, which I don't know if either of you are into his work, but it's it's a really great cast. It's Giovanna Depo from Overlord and Grace Van Patten, who we just saw in like Mayday and Meyerowitz Stories before that and everything. Also, Lucas Haas was in this, which I wasn't expecting. Kimberly Williams Paisley and Jahi DeHala Winston, who you remember from Charm City Kings, which was a really good movie. I really liked that one. And then also Mary J. Blige is in this film. So I was like, what the heck is this movie? I got assigned to review it for the young folks. And it's like a kind of like a modern Romeo and Juliet, but it takes place in like middle America. And the whole story is like there's this murder that this guy witnesses when he's a kid, and it shakes up his family, and then he's dealing with trauma and everything, but then he falls in love with Grace Van Patten's character, and there's just like this kind of forbidden romance thing, and it's a very plain Jane sort of movie. I kind of, it's another movie where like the ending twist is not very surprising. I think a lot of people are going to see it coming. So it's one of those things where it's like you're just waiting for it for a lot of the movie, and it's very ambitious. And I found it to be the kind of film that normally would have like go straight to a streaming service. So I was a little surprised that Gravitas Ventures put this out as kind of like an indie release, because it just, I don't know. For an indie movie, it's not very unique. It's not very specific. There was like nothing in it where I felt like, man, what a bold vision that this director really had. It just kind of felt very plain and simple, pretty straightforward. But it's not bad or anything. It's like well made. It's good performances. It's just a lot of like conventional plots kind of coming together, and very, very lovely film in terms of like how it's shot. And, there's actually some really decent set pieces in here from a filmmaking standpoint that I was entertained by for sure. But yeah, I just never was like, man, this story is very different and important. And I feel like I got a ton out of it. It just kind of ends and I'm like, that's it. It's that kind of thing, I guess. Yeah, I ended up being like a pretty high C+, not a very low B-. It's kind of like around there. I think like some people might enjoy it, but I don't think it's worth your time nearly as much as it probably should be, considering the pedigree of the cast. I still think Grace Van Patten in particular is, between this and Mayday, I think she's such a great actress and she has so much to offer, but in her movies, I feel like she's being utilized in like very odd ways. Particularly in this movie, she's kind of like, I don't want to say eye candy, but like she's kind of positioned in the movie a bit like exploitatively in a way that I think is kind of iffy. I don't know if it's just me. I don't know if it, what the deal is there, but yeah, there was something about this character that I think the writing wasn't quite there, quite reaching up to her talents. And by contrast, you have Giovanna Depo, who, fantastic in Overlord. And I was really anxious to see him in another film again. In this film, he gets way more gravitas Ventures. He gets just way more of like a heavy lift of a character to wrestle with, and yeah, it's okay. I don't think anybody should run to VOD to check this out. I think it's only available in VOD as far as I understand it. But yeah. Also, Will, you saw something on Mubi, right? Called Dead Pigs. What's that one?
Yeah, so this is the long-delayed Kathy Yan directorial debut. People I think probably know Kathy Yan best from her sophomore film, which is Birds of Prey, which came out last year. And I believe, Abby, you were a big fan of this one, right? This is one of your favorites from last year?
Birds of Prey, yeah, for sure. I've been hearing great things about Kathy Yan and also Dead Pigs, so I'm excited to hear what you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, this is one that I believe, I might be speaking out of turn here, but I believe this is the film that got her the job. It premiered at Sundance in 2018, and then shortly thereafter, she, was hired to make Birds of Prey, and I was really excited to see it because it got a lot of great buzz out of the festival, but for whatever reason, it never really got picked up during the filmmaking and then subsequently the release of Birds of Prey. And now that Mubi finally picked it up, it's available widely. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see it in theaters, but at least it's out, and I'm glad that's the case because it's actually a really solid directorial debut. It's an ensemble piece that's sort of loosely based on like crime and this like dysfunctional family, so it doesn't really narratively really expand beyond what we've seen in other films in this vein, in this genre. It has kind of like a touch of sin vibe throughout, but I think what's really impressive about it is the fact that it is her directorial debut and she's able to accomplish all these different narratives in a way that feel very fully fleshed out the characters themselves are very organically weaved together in a way that's interesting and engaging throughout. And she has a strong visual style here. The use of neon colors will be familiar for people who watch Birds of Prey, but also just the way she uses sets and different different environments to play into the narrative and the characters, and the way that she develops their characters and personalities, I think is really a sign of how touched and developed she is already as a filmmaker early on. And so the narrative itself is based on a incident that happened in 2013 where a bunch of dead pigs were found in the river, and she uses that as a catalyst to develop this plot where like these different family members are different or they're basically all at odds, and they're just trying to figure out how they can kind of survive in their own different situations. And I think the end of it doesn't fully come together in a way to make it feel like a fully enriched film, but I think what comes before that is really strong and promising. And by and large, I think this is a really strong debut. And, I like Birds of Prey, not quite as much as this film, but I definitely think she is proving herself to be quite an adept and accomplished filmmaker early on. And I'm excited to see where she goes next. I don't know if Birds of Prey 2 is on the horizon or she's going to make another film like this, but either way, I'm definitely excited to see where she goes. So I gave this one a firm and solid B+. It's worth your while.
Wow. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Touch of Sin too, because didn't that come out in 2013, the same year then as this incident?
Yeah, I mean, I would not be surprised if she saw Touch of Sin and then that incident happened, maybe a light bulb came up over her head, but I don't exactly know what the genesis was, but...
could be a coincidence, but yeah.
Possibly.
All right, last film for mini reviews I have here is Silk Road, which another kind of film that sort of like came and went. This is a Lionsgate release. I think it's available on demand right now. You might be able to rent. I think you can just rent it. I'm not sure. But this film, another one that I'm kind of surprised it's not really releasing with much fanfare considering the pedigree. It's written and directed by Taylor Russell, and it stars Jason Clarke, Nick Robinson, Katie Aselton, Alexander Shipp, another Paul Walter Hauser, another, pretty decent cast here, a lot of recognizable people. I know Nick Robinson, he's just coming off of... I don't want to say acclaim. I think he's getting a lot of praise for his performance in A Teacher, the Hulu series that critics kind of wrote off that show the first couple episodes because it kind of came off like it was glorifying like the predatory nature of like teacher-student relationships. But if you stick with the show, which I did, it actually is a really great it's a really great like outline of the predatory nature of that relationship and what it does to the student. And Nick Robinson in particular is fantastic in that show. So I was really looking forward to this movie where he really gets a lot of time to shine. We haven't really seen him get a lot of time since like Love, Simon. And this film, it's okay. Again, it's another kind of C+ movie. It's about a real thing that happened in the early 2010s. Where there was this website called Silk Road where you could buy drugs online and get them shipped to you through like the US Postal Service. They used Bitcoin and the dark web to make it untraceable. And like, so that people were able to like ship things to each other in such a way that it was just hard to trace. And the FBI spent a ton of time, or the FBI and the DEA were trying super hard to like shut this thing down. And little did they know that the mastermind behind it was like just this like 20-something, millennial gangster, as he's called in the film, working out of Texas. And, as far as like true story kind of things go, it's definitely not the kind of like thing where I guess I'll put it this way. A documentary probably would have worked a little bit better here. There are some things that they do that are still kind of lifted from true events, particularly with Jason Clarke, who is this DEA agent who kind of goes to incredible lengths, maybe some morally questionable ones in order to like prove himself, because he's more of like the baby boomer character who is like, trying to catch this millennial using like old fashioned techniques, right? There's a lot of commentary in this film about how, his superiors at the, cybercrimes division, it's like, they just want to solve crimes using code and Snapchat or whatever. And he's like, let's get boots on the ground, people, let's go bust in some doors. And like his approach kind of like wavers between like questionable to like outright illegal and pretty messed up. And there's certainly like interesting territory there. But it's tough because like I think a documentary could have been way more fascinating considering the fact that it's a true story. And there's a lot of mystery behind what happened here. There's a lot of like dubious stuff that I think lends itself better to the documentary format. In this format, I think that Russell is really just trying to like force in all this commentary about like generational differences that I don't think is all that compelling. And, you know, it's not that the performances are weak or anything, but I do think Alexandra Shipp, poor Alexandra Shipp, who in this is just like a total prop. And it's awful because I think she has a lot of talent. She's gotten herself in a lot of trouble, you know, just as a celebrity, I guess. Like she's said some pretty ridiculous things about certain roles, and you know, I wouldn't say she's been canceled or anything, but I think definitely people have like some issues with her, you know, some of the things that she said, which we don't need to get into. But just in terms as an actor, I just think that she has plenty to offer. I feel like we've seen her in some things that have, you know, she's been shown a lot of promise, but she keeps just getting these roles where I guess it's kind of similar to Violent Heart, where I just feel like people don't know what to do with these characters. It's so tropey, and it's just kind of insulting to like how she's nothing but like a foil to the main character. And yeah, I'd say all of the female roles in this are pretty bad, you know, just from a script perspective. So it really brings the film down for me, because otherwise I do think it's pretty watchable. It's the kind of thing like it's like a TV movie. Like I feel like you could sit down, watch it with your parents and be like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Like it's not offensive. It's not like the kind of movie that's you feel like you just wasted 2 hours necessarily. But at the same time, I think like it's not going to leave much of an impact. And I think that's why they're kind of quietly releasing this. My review for it came out on Awards Watch, and yeah, I kind of came down on the side of, if you definitely have issues with like libertarians, I guess you're going to find this movie kind of a bit of a Schadenfreude in that sense, at least. So otherwise, I think it's pretty skippable. So it's like a C+ movie. But that's it for, I guess, mini reviews. It's been kind of a weird week in terms of like things kind of coming out on the periphery, but we do have some pretty big movies to talk about. So let's just jump right into them, starting with I Care a Lot.
Good morning, Miss Peterson. I'm sorry to disturb you so early. The court has ruled that you require assistance in taking care of yourself.
I'm fine.
I'm afraid it's not up to you to decide. The court has appointed me to be your legal guardian.
What?
You have to come with me. And remember, I'm here to help.
My name is Marla Grayson.
I'm just someone who cares.
Marla Grayson, you've had amazing success. What's your secret?
There is no secret, Peter.
She forces them into the home, auctions off their house, and uses the proceeds to pay herself.
Because caring is my job.
Bitch!
I will grab your dick and balls, and I will rip them clean off.
Big deal maker.
I know what you do here. Your hustle. Look at all these cash cows on your wall just leaking money into your account. But Jennifer Peterson, she's off limits. She has very powerful friends who can make life uncomfortable for you.
How uncomfortable are we talking?
I Care a Lot is a new dark comedy thriller written and directed by Jay Blakeson. This is the director of Fifth Wave, right? And Disappearance of Alice Creed. Definitely not a director who I was expecting was going to have a big kind of splashy TIFF premiere, which happened just this past year. And Care a Lot came out. It was world premiered at Toronto, and people really dug it as it came out. It got pretty positive reviews. It wasn't as big of a film, I think, as like Nomadland, but now it's on Netflix, and I think it's starting to pick up an audience. It's starting to pick up some traction with people, at least in some sense. But we'll talk about it. This film stars Rosamund Pike, who part of the conversation with this film too is her Golden Globe nomination and some of the awards potential for this one. But yeah, Rosamund Pike, she plays Marla Grayson, who is a con artist who basically cons elderly people into coming under her care as a legal guardian. She's like gamed the system where she colludes with doctors and nursing home or elder care homes in order to like get people who aren't really suffering from dementia to basically be separated and exploited by the system so that she can get their money. it's extremely awful. This is how the film opens. Like, this is our main character. But then she eventually gets a person under her care who's known as a cherry. They're like, oh, this is perfect. This person, no real family connections. We can just sort of like, siphon her for all the money in the world. But then she kind of finds out that maybe this person, who's played by Diane Wiest, is going to be a bit more than she bargained for, particularly some connections she might have to some pretty ruthless characters, one of them played by Peter Dinklage in probably his most horrifying role in a long time, maybe since Elf, in fact. But yeah, this is I Care a Lot, a film that is definitely starting up some conversations. We'll start with you, Abiel Chesney. What did you think of this movie? Did you care about it a lot?
I did, actually. I was pleasantly surprised that this got the release and the attention that it did. I'm a big fan of Disappearance of Alice Creed, which is the only other movie that Jay Blakeson has written and directed. I believe he directed was it Fourth Wave or Fifth Wave? Fifth Wave, yeah. He directed Fifth Wave, but did not write it. And I think he also did some work on the script for the sequel to Neil Marshall's The Descent. But Disappearance of Alice Creed is a movie that I liked a lot. I have a real soft spot in my heart for like weird British genre filmmakers who have just a real strange, bitter taste to the movies that they make. I think Jay Blakeson as a director, his output so far has really reminded me of Danny Boyle a little bit, like early Danny Boyle, a little bit of early Matthew Vaughn. This movie in particular has a lot of similarities to Layer Cake, which is a movie I love. There were a lot of things that were kind of predisposing me to want this movie to do well, and I was really pleasantly surprised at how satisfying I found it. I feel like there is a lot of moral turpitude going on in this one. It's really hard to know kind of who to root for. I've watched this once by myself and once with my parents, and it's been really interesting to kind of see where loyalties lie with this one. But there's a lot of, I think, while some of the elements of the plot are not terribly surprising, especially if you've watched Layer Cake, there are some things that you can kind of see coming a ways away. But where was I going with that? Sorry. Oh, yeah. So even though like some of the dramatic beats might not be terribly surprising, I feel like the writing is really strong in terms of some specific characters and some specific lines that I think really pop on the page, and the performances throughout the movie, I think, really respond to that. Rosamund Pike is doing a great job as kind of a more lively version of Amy Dunn, I think, from Gone Girl, which this has gotten some other kind of, connections and comparisons to. I think Dinklage is great. Chris Messina has a couple of really good scene-stealing moments as a slimy lawyer, and Diane Wiest is really bringing it too. So I think throughout, it's just really solid performances top to bottom.
Yeah, I definitely want to shout out Isaac Gonzalez, who, man, we haven't seen a lot of her since Baby Driver, and I feel like this movie definitely like has a nice place for her, where she really is like this kind of linchpin to the character of Marla Grayson, which I guess we'll talk about. I mean, I think that this is a tricky performance. Like, it's so easy, I think, to what you're saying, Abby, to come away from this movie being like, everybody in here is awful and I hate everybody. But I do think there are some key characters here who kind of make it a little bit more complicated than that. And I think Isaac Gonzalez is one of them. And man, she is given such a difficult task in this movie. And I definitely think that she deserves some awards attention too, personally. But all right, Will Ashton, I already have a sense that maybe you're not as high up on this film as Abby and myself. So where do you stand? What's your take on this one?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good film that I think promises to be a little bit better than it is, but I think for what it is, especially as a Netflix viewing, I think it's fine. I guess where I disagree, or where I'm not quite as strong, is that I think the movie, as I was telling you, John, before, I think it kind of toes this line between being mean and mean-spirited, and I think it often favors being mean-spirited over being mean. And by that, I mean, like, I think the beginning of the film, like we were saying, like it introduces this character who, I don't think the movie makes any preconceptions about it. It's just a horrible person who is, taking advantage of these people, just making money for her own personal gain, just basically robbing people blind. And that's fine if you want to introduce that movie that way. But I think as the movie goes along, it doesn't really it starts to be kind of different things at once. And I don't think it ever really gets as mean as it wants to be, which I think is interesting because it starts off, like we were saying, being about this, pretty ruthless character who is willing to go to these extremes to do these things. And I think part of it might be that I feel like I got an idea of who she is, but I don't fully get a sense of like what makes her tick. And I think of something like Nightcrawler, where it's like that's a similar character where it's like, he's, like kind of like this guy who's like leeching off the system and, basically trying to get his own personal gain from it. But I understand where he's coming from and I fully get that. And I think this movie's trying to do like an unraveling of that. But by the end, I don't really feel like I got a full sense of the character beyond just kind of, generalities. But I think where I was most entertained or endeared by the film was the middle of the film, where, like you're saying, like that's where the script is flipped, and it's basically kind of like the spy versus spy type thing, where, like these awful people are being awful to one another, and I wish the movie was like that for the majority of it, because I think that's where it's the most entertaining, and I think that's where it was like the most fun. But by the end of it, it picks a side, and I think that's annoying because I don't really think this movie needs to. I think it's better off it's just, letting the awful characters be awful to one another. And ultimately, I felt like that was a bit of a missed opportunity by the end. But like I said, I think like we were saying, it's true. Like I think it's a slick, well-made, entertaining film from a production standpoint. And I do like the performances a lot, especially from Peter Dinklage, Rosamund Pike, and especially Diane Weiss, as Abby was saying. I think she's fantastic in this, and, no surprise because it's Diane Weiss. But by and large, I think it's fine. I enjoyed watching it for the time I had it, but as time has passed since I've seen it, I've grown some more negative feelings towards it. But we can discuss that more in a little bit.
Yeah, slick is the word for this movie. Like it's just got like this energy to it. Like as soon as you start the movie, it just kind of like it's full speed. I think my issues with this movie, I really like it. And I think like I've liked it more like on retrospect because I've kind of looked into some of the criticism, seeing what people are saying. And, where I stand is I think that the first half up until the third act is just really fantastic, like material stuff. I just think it's like so fun to watch. I think like from the very beginning, it's like a roller coaster when it just like zooms you in. But I do think like the ending of it just kind of, it's not bad. It just sort of like goes down it's just like a nice little glide, compared to how fast and exciting the first part of the movie is, like up and like through the middle. Did you have a similar experience with that, Abby?
I think I kind of did, especially on rewatch. The first 2/3 of it are just like, yeah, there's a lot of momentum. It's really going. The individual performances are just incredible. And then, yeah, that third act, it does kind of glide down a little bit. I feel like there are some sort of plot developments that strain credulity a little, especially on rewatch, thinking about it a little more. It doesn't quite fit together as strongly as I might have thought. But I do think that the ultimate ending I was quite pleased with. Again, Same. If you've seen Layer Cake, it's about as satisfying in that moment too. So I think it does kind of pull back up there at the end. But yeah, there are a few minutes there toward in the third act of the film that don't work quite as well as the rest of the movie.
See, like that's the thing. I can agree that just in terms of like how things develop, like how it's executed, I totally understand why people are a little like, it just doesn't really go to a place that is very satisfying. But I think thematically it really works. I've seen a lot of this, like I guess kind of similar to what you're saying, Will. It's like, well, man, this movie is just kind of like mean-spirited, and it's like, are we really supposed to be rooting for this? Like, I just, am miserable with these characters, and I think specifically people have criticized Rosamund Pike and Isaac Gonzalez in this movie.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, it's not the movie is mean. If anything, I think it should be more willing to be meaner than it is, I think. Because if it's going to be about a character who is wholly despicable, I think it should willing to be indulging that aspect of it. And I feel like it's not really like doing that.
Okay. That's where I disagree.
Okay.
I think,
and it's fine. I mean, you can. Yes,
well, that's the thing, because you brought up Nightcrawler, and I think that's a great example because Nightcrawler, that movie works because there's no redeeming aspect to him. He is just sociopathic, and that is the point of his character. But what I do think that there is a type of character who is ruthless, but is still a human being, a monster who will still like have sympathetic qualities. To me, that's even scarier than Nightcrawler. And that is why I think this movie like hit me thematically, because her character, she is horrible. She is evil. Yes. But she has this connection to another person. That is the only thing she cares about. And because the film kind of brings that in and it just makes it all the more terrifying that somebody who is actually like a human being, I feel like I would know this person in real life, that she's capable of doing something like this. I think that is what this movie is trying to get across. And I think it gets it across super well. And the way the film ends, I think if it doesn't end the way it does, I think this film is a total misfire. And like is the kind of thing where I'm like, oh my gosh, that is a terrible decision. But it ends the way it does, I think, because it is commenting so much on how these people do tend to succeed in our society, and it's like really sad and scary.
Yeah, I think there's an element of gender politics there as well. At least watching it as a woman who appreciates seeing other women be good at their jobs. Yeah, Marla's a terrible person, but yeah, her relationship to Fran, Isa Gonzalez's character, is, I mean, even though Fran is also like her partner in crime, like they really love each other. Like that's a genuine relationship. And it seems like, that's something that kind of complicates the waters a little bit. She seems to get on well with the people in her office. It seems like she's probably like, yes, her business is awful, but she's probably a decent person to work for, or so it seems. And she's taking charge and she's really good at her job. Like it's really interesting to see a empowered woman be good at her job and let people know that she's good at her job. So like that's an element that's kind of appealing as well. But yeah, there do need to be consequences. And so when those consequences do finally come home to roost, I think it's good and it's necessary to have that happen. I think it's interesting to have that twist happen to a female character, whereas we've seen that with male characters before in the past as well. I think it's also worth noting that in Jay Blakeson's filmography overall, that like morally suspect, intelligent, and empowered female characters are things that he's also done before. Like that was also sort of the driving force behind the disappearance of Alice Creed. So I think that's kind of an interesting track record to see from a male director, somebody who's willing to do that with female characters.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can see where I guess we're disagreeing in that. I guess for me, those elements are introduced, and I think that's the aspect of it that I find intriguing. But ultimately, they run flat for me because I just don't really buy that. Like, I just don't think that humanity really comes in. I think it's introduced, and I think it works really well in the disappearance of Alice Creed. And I think that is a reason why that movie, I think I'm a little bit more taken by that. And I can see where Jay Blakeson, is really accomplished as a director. But I guess I find myself disappointed because that aspect of it ultimately just doesn't fully connect for me. It feels like it's a lot telegraphed and it's not really being communicated to me throughout the film. And I guess that's just where we ultimately disagree, and that's fine.
Yeah,
I guess that's where.
It's just a matter of like you're not picking up on the same thing, or we're not picking up on the same thing, whatever it is. I think it is the performance. I think the performance is what makes this character walk that really delicate line of being sympathetic without being celebrated. And I think that why this movie has kind of hit me a little bit more than expected is just because I think its statement about, I think it's really easy to watch this film and kind of like have this like moral superiority while you're watching it and being like, man, how terrible is this person? But then I think some people will watch this and hopefully recognize like, people are like this. Like this happens all the time. These are the people who are successful in America in particular. Is like this kind of person who is personable, who like people like Abby was saying, who, is in a loving relationship. And otherwise you would not even suspect that behind the scenes, the way that they are getting ahead is by being extremely manipulative and exploitative to people who don't deserve it. And I like this movie a lot because it presents that without being preachy, without being heavy-handed, without making her this like completely one-dimensional sociopathic uber villain. Instead, it makes her be like, this could be any of us if we go down a certain road. And in fact, I'm sure there's tons of people watching this who would probably think that like, oh, I would never do that. But then maybe like self-examination be like, oh, I've done that before. Like I've definitely maybe not to the same extent, maybe not to the same like ruthlessness as her, But yeah, I think that this movie it's sneaky in that way, and that's a big reason why I appreciate it as much as I do. And I think it all comes down to the performances here selling what would otherwise be a character that people would find just totally distasteful. I think I have like confused feelings about this main character because you obviously dislike her, but it's just so hard to like dislike her because she's so charismatic, she's so iconic looking, and when you see her like interact with Fran, it's just, and Fran too, I think as a character is really interesting considering like has a bit more of a conscience, yeah, but she doesn't really like stick up for the people who are being exploited. She kind of goes along with it, and that also is interesting commentary on like how many people do we know like that who should know better or who should be more of a conscience to other people, but they just let things go because they're benefiting from it. They're profiting from, they may not be always doing the direct thing. They may not be calling the shots, but they know it's happening and they're totally permitting it. I love the commentary in this, I guess. But okay, I guess that's a fertile ground for us to go into our final thoughts. Abby, what's your grade for this one? And yeah, it sounds like you're pretty high up on it.
I am. I think I would give this like a high B to low B plus. I think, yeah, there are some parts of it that don't quite work as well, but I think it's trying to do some interesting things. It displays influences that I have a lot of love for. I feel like the kind of morally complicated, no good people sort of aspect of it that reminds me very specifically of a lot of other British films. I feel like that's a pretty distinctly UK-based perspective, is one that I appreciate, and I like that it's finally getting kind of a more mainstream audience. So yeah, it's solid filmmaking. I'm glad that Jay Blakeson is getting a slightly larger audience than he's had previously, and I hope that it is kind of an arbiter of some more good things to come for him.
All right. And what about you, Will?
Yeah, I mean, I guess ultimately I'm seeing a different film here than you two. I guess I just didn't get quite as enriched an experience, but that's fine. I mean, I really want like more movies in this vein where it has, morally gray or morally complex women characters that are willing to, not be super likable or, super endearing in this way, but they have that kind of like cold, darkness to them that's very intriguing. I guess ultimately, though, for me, this film, It has a lot of stuff that works in it. I really do like Rosamund Pike's performance. I can see why it's getting award recognized, but I guess ultimately something about it just didn't, that humanity that you two are referring to, I guess just didn't, it wasn't quite as clear for me. I just felt like it was a lot more scripted or a lot more telegraphed than it was, than you two are suggesting, I guess. But that's fine. I mean, I guess it happens. We disagree, and that's how this goes sometimes. But, I did enjoy the experience. Like I said before, like it's a slick, entertaining film. I enjoyed my time watching it, but as time has passed, a day or two later, I just don't find myself thinking back on it quite as fondly as you two do. But oh well, I think it's a fine and enjoyable B-, and I think Netflix is a pretty good place for it because I think it'll find the audience that it seeks. But in the end, something about it has left me a bit cold, and that's I'm disappointed because I really I want to share that enthusiasm that you have for it, John. But I guess that's how these things go sometimes.
No, I mean, look, I've come across plenty of other reviews that have been in the same vein. You're not alone. I know May Abdul-Baki, she, a friend of the show, she was a bit mixed on it as well. It's definitely not the kind of film where it's like everybody loves it except for Will. No, I mean, I think that that's something I like about it, is that it's so complicated. You can walk away from it having a different experience, and I think that's pretty valid. For me, I'm a pretty hearty B+ on this. I think that, yeah, despite losing a lot of momentum and it doesn't quite land its plane as in the same like energy and electricity as like the first part of the film, I was really engaged with it and really happy with what I saw here. And man, another film I wish I could have seen in a theater, but I think seeing it on Netflix too is great because I think a lot of people will watch it and get something out of it, I hope. But yeah. That is I Care a Lot. It is now available to watch on Netflix, and it is 118 minutes long, just under 2 hours. Pretty easy watch, I think. I think people will be able to definitely start it, do it from like front to back and really enjoy it. It's also available on Prime Video, Amazon Prime Video, depending on where you live. It's like Netflix, I think, just in North America or maybe just America. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, depending on where you live, it's either on Netflix or Amazon. Let's get into our next film. This one, definitely a widely celebrated film. This is the new A24 family drama, Minari. So Minari, it premiered at last year's Sundance Film Festival. This is the 2021. And we've talked about it a few times on the show because I talked about it because after seeing it at Sundance. I know Abby, you've kind of mentioned when you got a chance to see it, and it's kind of had a weird release. It hit theaters just on February 12th. It's now about to hit on demand, and so we finally found some time to talk about it. Will, you were finally able to see it. I've said plenty about this film. It was my number 2 film of last year. I don't have too much else to say, although I was really, really privileged to be able to talk to one of the actors, Ye Jung-yoon, legendary actor, a Korean actor who plays Sunja in the film, and that interview is live right now on the Cinemaholics feed. That was a blast. This film is directed by Lee Isaac Chung. It also stars Steven Yeun, Han Ye-ri, Alan Kim, Noel Kate Cho, and Will Patton. So, Will, since you kind of came to this film later than the rest of us, what did you think of Minari, and if you can kind of set it up for everybody?
Yeah, sure. This is in a sense, you're a little bit traditional American Dream type story where we follow a family, trying to establish their own, plane in life. In this case, we have a Korean family who is, I forget which state they move into.
Arkansas.
Very middle America type place. And he, the father here, played by Steven Yeun, he gets a chance to run this like mini farm, and even though his wife is very reluctant to it, he's very adamant that this is going to be like their way of getting like their own in life, their way to kind of establish their own livelihood, their own grounds, like their own family, like their own home basically. And so they are trying to make this thing work, but clearly there's some reservations and different issues that tend to come from there. And we follow basically this family as they're just trying to make their way in Arkansas. And it's a very gentle, I believe, autobiographical type film. I don't want to speak for the film.
Yeah, semi-autobiographical. Yeah, there's a lot of stories in here straight from Lee Isaac Chung's life, but yeah, it's not like a one-to-one thing.
Yeah, I mean, I assume because like the son, like, or at least David, his story felt very, based in realism or somewhat from the perspective of the filmmaker, because we follow his POV a lot throughout the film. So I figured that was, the filmmaker's autobiographical side, but I didn't want to assume because, I don't know much about the filmmaker and his personal life. But I think those are the moments that really stand out to me. I think that's where the movie really is enriched, and you can tell like those autobiographical moments really inform the film in a good way. But I think altogether it's a well-rounded, heartfelt, sincere film that I think from a story standpoint doesn't really do that much different, but I think the perspective that's given to it is where it really stands out. And we get, like you said, these lot of realistic touches that inform the story in a heartfelt and sincere way. And especially as it gets along and you develop the characters and you get to see their, individuals' perspectives and just how they perceive this new living situation. I think it really comes together in a well-informed way. And I can definitely see why you and a lot of critics got a lot out of it when it premiered at Sundance last year.
Yeah, it's something else when you watch it like with other people, for sure. And yeah, I did get a chance to rewatch this, and one thing that I picked up on a little bit more in terms of David's character is how dreamy and how this movie's story does feel a lot like nostalgia and childhood, like the way that there's not like one through line of the story. I mean, there is, but the plot really does sort of feel like how time passes when you're a kid. It's just like, there is no sense of real time. You're not really grounded in a very specific, because you're a kid, like everything you're experiencing feels kind of like all blurred together, which is something I think is a really cool filmmaking technique that Chung gets across here. But okay, Abby Olcese, you saw this one not too long ago, a couple months ago now, and I think your main thing with it was the chicken sexing controversy, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure it's only a controversy with me, but it's probably also a controversy with anybody who's ever hatched their own chicks. But apart from that, I do like this movie a lot. The chicken sexing scandal in kind of a nutshell, is that the two parents, Steven Yeun's character and Yeri Han's character, their day job is working in a hatchery where they are sexing chickens and separating them by gender. And I just want to note up front that you cannot sex chicks when they are that small. You have to actually wait for them to grow and start displaying actual characteristics of roosterness in order to actually tell that you have a male chick. However, I understand that certain liberties have to be taken for the sake of it being a movie.
And if you can put aside that one
Yes.
glaring
One
massive,
aesthetic thing. Yes.
I understand it's a lot to ask. It is. But if you can do it.
Yes, I can. There's a lot else about this movie that I like a lot. I grew up in Southeast Kansas, not far from Arkansas, where this takes place, and there's a lot of similarities, I think, with kind of rural Ozark adjacent communities and farming culture. I appreciated the 80s evangelical era stamp on it when the family goes to church. There are a lot of other specifics that really did ring true for me, in addition to it just being a really lovely story about a family trying to live the American dream and the struggles therein. I think a lot of the individual characters are super great. Yoon Ye-jung is, I think, a real highlight of the movie as their grandmother. She's just a delight to watch, and just a shout out. The Kansas City Film Critics Circle did give her the award for best supporting actress this year, and I was very proud of us for having voted her in. I think it's also worth shouting out Will Patton as their kind of odd neighbor Paul, who is just very sweet and very friendly and trying to help them, but also has his own strange quirks that, again, as somebody who grew up not terribly far from where this movie takes place, felt very true to people that I have met in that area, just in terms of how he views his faith and kind of how he walks in the world, and how he's a generally very kind person who you're not always sure it's safe to be around, even though it usually is. But yeah, there are just a lot of very, very lovely pieces of this movie. And Stephen Yeun's performance is another one that's very, very strong and very thoughtful, and you can tell that it has a lot of personal meaning to him as an actor, in addition to just it being a good performance.
Yeah. There's so much honesty in this movie. It says things and it does things that aren't always convenient for a movie to sort of be, things that you wouldn't always consider cinematic, but it goes there. Like, who wants to watch like a couple argue while their kids listen in? Especially in this type of movie. Like, usually filmmakers feel like you have to tone that stuff down so that, you don't get bummed out. But no, this film goes there. It allows those moments of like just that discomfort, because you're there with those kids in those moments, and it makes the joyful moments of the film feel all the better. But without making it seem like you're getting a sanitized version of this childhood that we're experiencing. I would also say the same thing. First of all, I appreciate that this was actually filmed in Oklahoma, so not quite Arkansas, but it feels like the South. Like, this isn't like a suburb of LA, and it's not even like the suburb of Atlanta, which is still the South, but we tend to get that version of the South, which is just different, not better or worse or anything, just different. But I think like that area of the country is very specific, and, not that Oklahoma and Arkansas are exactly the same, but it's at least in the same zone. And one thing that I think that you kind of touched on it, Abby, that this film, what encapsulates how much this film works for me is specifically that whole scene, or like all the scenes that have to do with like the people in the area, the evangelicals there. I think sometimes people who aren't really from the South, who try to depict like racism in the South, they tend to, not that it's wrong to do this, but like it's kind of like a contrivance at this point, or a trope. It just happens a lot where it's just very overt. Like, you just have people who are just really racist to your face in a very like mean-spirited, very like bigoted, Disney Channel original movie from the 90s. Like, we need to talk about racism kind of way, which, of course there's a place for that because it does happen. But I think what's interesting about this film is like casual racism and evangelicals in general, they're more awkward than anything else. Like, it's the kind of thing that a lot of people don't even notice. But like, it does happen. And that is so much more representative, I think.
Yeah. My dad used to work in international education. He in a small college in Southeast Kansas, where I grew up, and he was responsible for helping establish partnerships with colleges overseas and getting international students to come to the school, and often like helping them find places to live long term after they decided to move to the country in some cases. But yeah, I've been to many a church function where well-meaning white evangelical individuals were trying to welcome international students into their new community, and just being well-intentioned but just super awkward. And that was a perspective that I appreciated seeing here. That it's not always necessarily outright like horrible. It's just weird and strange and kind of alienating, and I feel like that's a perspective that I've definitely seen reflected in real life as well.
Right. It's not like rudeness necessarily. I mean, it is, but it's not like, because I think like politeness and manners are really, really important in this part of the country. And so like people aren't trying to be rude. They're trying to be nice. They're trying to be welcoming, but obviously there is like a barrier there. And that's where the social awkwardness comes in. And that to me is more interesting because we don't see a lot of that in film. We just sort of see the like, oh, you just think that you are superior to this person. And that's where all of the conversation ends up. But I like how this movie has just something different to say about it, where, I've been in this situation. I've had people be like, oh, but where are you from? It's like, oh yeah, I was born in Boston. Okay. But like, where were you before that? Like even if you say something like that, it's just kind of a thing. And it's like you said, it's not that they have the worst intentions in the world or they want you to feel bad or anything like that. It's just like a casual racism. It's a thing that happens. And, I like that this part of the movie gets into that. We can talk about Ye Jung-yoon for sure. I think she's like what makes this film really, really work. I think up until her introduction, I think the film is kind of struggling to find its footing, but I think her introduction is so great because she's like kind of the anti-American dream. She kind of has like a different perspective than Monica and Jacob on like what's best for like these kids. And I love how the story like introduces her. We should say she first Korean actress to ever be nominated for Best Supporting on the Screen Actor Guild Awards. And I really hope she gets an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actress because she really deserves it. Will, yeah, I know, you were kind of messaging me while you were watching this movie. It sounds like to me, like maybe this character was working for you. Is that the case?
Yeah, no, I mean, I didn't want to make it sound like we're focused on her just because you had the interview with her, but I do really think she is, like you said, like kind of the heart of the film, or the reason why it works so well is because she has a clear perspective. She fits in a little bit differently than the other characters, but she's also, complex and nuanced in her own individual ways. And I think what you're referring to more specifically is that she doesn't give any D's or F's when it comes to what she does, which I think is, quite entertaining from a film standpoint. But I think, some of her moments, kind of have like the very heavily scripted moments, which, like where we get like the title drop and stuff, which might ring false for some people. But I think it works by and large. I really do think her performance is key, like you said, to the film working. But I do think generally just the whole cast here is quite good. For me, it's really, I think, comes down to her and then Alan S. Kim, who plays David. I think he's only like 7 when they filmed this. I don't exactly know how old he was when
he was dabbing at Sundance, if I recall.
Really?
whole time. Fantastic.
Yeah, we see so many child performers that, some of them are quite good, but, just the complexity he brings his performance, and, it's such a nuanced character in the way it's written. And I think it's really a testament, not only to the screenplay, but how he plays it, especially for an actor so young. I think that's also one of the key reasons why the movie works. And I agree with you, Abby, that Will Patton's performance is quite good. Though I must admit, when I saw him, for some reason, my brain kept thinking that it was Will Poulter. Like I kept people talking, seeing him. Like I saw Will P. So like I don't know. For some reason, my brain kept assuming that Will Poulter was going to show up in the film for some reason, and I don't know why. But
that's a different movie too, because if he's going to be showing up in a movie like this, he's not going to be casually racist. It's just
that's what I mean. I was like, I kept waiting for him. Like, is he going to be at the church? Is he going to be in the hospital? Like, where's Will Poulter? And then like I looked it up. And I was like, oh, people were talking about Will Patton. That makes sense. So that's my bad. There's no reason why, other than my brain being weird, why Will Poulter was supposed to be in this film.
It's not like you wanted him here. It's not you were like, this movie's only going to work if he's here.
I like Will Poulter a lot. I think he's a very talented actor, but
Sure.
I mean, I just don't know why. For some reason, for I guess like 85% of the film, I was just like, when's Will Poulter going to show up? Like they keep delaying him. He's supposed to be here at some point, and then I looked it up, and then it wasn't. But
I could like read your notes where you're like, I'm docking this a full letter grade if he doesn't show up.
I just kept wondering, like, when are they going to establish this Will Poulter character, and then he just never showed up. So, I think, like you were saying, I think it just really works in those kind of key nuanced ways. There are a couple things that don't quite work for me from like a screenplay standpoint. Like there's a moment at the end during the climax that felt a little contrived. Like they set it up, but it kind of felt a little easy in terms of a resolution. But it's just all minor stuff, I think, by and large. Like Abby was saying, like I think what works here is what really shines, and I can see this one growing on me in my estimation as I think about it more.
Totally. Not a hard film to nitpick for sure. I think my big nitpick with it, and not even nitpick, this is more of a minor issue, is with how they handle the daughter, the sister played by Noel Kate Cho. I don't think she's really given her due. I feel like there's a deeper, more richer role for her in this movie, but she kind of gets forgotten. And I think it's definitely intentional that she's like, I wrote in my review that she's like the unsung hero of the family. Like looks after her brother, she's well behaved, but I just never think that she gets that real moment to like come into the film and like have her mark, which I think she deserves.
No,
Yeah.
I agree. I was actually going to be one of my. Sorry, I was just going to say that was actually going to be one of my notes for my final notes. That I wish there was more to her because her perspective felt lacking in comparison. But yeah, I agree.
You say as you stamp out Abby trying to say her perspective. I'm doing it too.
Sorry, my bad. I didn't do
you.
that on purpose. My apologies.
I was gonna say I think that if the film focused on her a little bit more, I feel like that would be a very different story. It's a story that I would like to see. But yeah, it's a very different experience that she has compared to the experience that her brother has and the experience that her parents are having. It's you can kind of see hints of that, like the beginnings of that conflict within her. But I would be super curious to see, like, really, even if she were to have like if a character like that were to have their own film, I feel like I would gladly watch that, and that would be a really rewarding experience too.
Right, yeah. And I think this film could have easily found room for it. I just think that they didn't, and that's what bugs me a little bit. But okay, let's do our final thoughts and grades for Minari. We'll start with you, Abby. Yeah, anything else you want to add? Anything from like music, cinematography, whatever you want to say.
Yeah, I think that there's been some good notes about the cinematography here too. It's really, I think, very pretty and very. I always appreciate it when kind of overlooked parts of the country, I guess in this case Oklahoma, standing in for Arkansas, kind of get a nice visual due. Just as a side note, I was writing about The Straight Story recently for Roger Ebert, and that was a thing that I really appreciated about that film as well. And yeah, it's always nice to see these parts of the country really to be shown as the natural the places of natural beauty that they really are. And I feel like the film does a good job of showing that, as well as accurately portraying like what it looks like to live there. I think overall this is an easy A for me. I think there's a lot about this that's super lovely, a lot of individual performances that really stand out, and a lot of this that I think is probably very authentic to Lee Isaac Chung's experience and memory of having grown up in this place. And I feel like that is apparent throughout.
Yeah. Real quick, I want to say, because I kind of made it sound like none of this takes place in Oklahoma, but there are some scenes that are in Oklahoma City. So, just saying, it's not a lot of the film or anything, but there are a few times where Monica and Jacob go to the city and all that. So yeah, it's all pretty close proximity. Okay, Will Ashton, final thoughts and your grade on Minari.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm thinking about it still. Like I only watched it yesterday, and I've been reflecting on it a lot. So my grade might go up as I think about it more, but right now I'm pretty firm and solid B+. Like we were saying, I think what works here really works, and I think the stuff that is so appealing about it resonates more as you think back on and reflect on it. So I can see this one being higher in my estimation as I think about it a little bit more. But for now, it's definitely a solid film, and I can definitely see the appeal for sure. All
right, yeah, same. For me, in terms like, it's definitely a film that grew on me, and I really liked it even at the start, so that's why I'm pretty high on it. I'm still an A. I think this film just really is lovely and beautiful. And I really want to mention Emile Masseri's score in this. Rewatching the film, I forgot how good the score is, like especially like the intro. And I've been kind of poring over the soundtrack lately. Emile Masseri, my goodness, between like this and Kajillionaire, Last Black Man in San Francisco, he is on like an ascent right now. And I really hope people are paying attention because his knack for composition, it's so unique and special and different. And it's fantastic, really. So yeah, I'm still a huge fan of this one. I think it's really great. And yeah, it sounds like it's an easy recommendation from all three of us. You can check out Minari right now in limited theatrical release. I know it's playing in some drive-ins, and it's going to be hitting on demand on February 26th, so later this week. All right, let's move on to our next film here. Flora and Ulysses. This is a new superhero family comedy that is now available to watch on Disney+. It was directed by Lena Khan. It comes from a screenplay by Brad Copeland, and it's actually based on a children's novel, which is also called Flora and Ulysses, which was written by Kate DiCamillo. It stars Matilda Lawler, Allison Hannigan, Ben Schwartz, Anna Devere Smith, and Danny Pudi, who I was not expecting to see this. Also Kate Micucci, who has a wonderful role, and a few surprises here and there, like Janine Garofalo and Benjamin Evan Ainsworth, excuse me. So yeah, this film, it's a Disney Plus movie. Going into this, I was being told it was very similar in tone and quality to Timmy Failure Mistakes Were Made, which was the Disney Plus streaming film that came out last year right after Sundance. Although this did not... I don't think this came out at Sundance at all, but unlike Timmy Failure. But that said, it just dropped on Disney Plus. Abby Olcese, what did you think of Flora and Ulysses? What is this one?
I'm pretty mixed on this, more mixed to negative, but to start us off, Flora and Ulysses is about a 10-year-old girl, Flora, played by Matilda Lawler, and her parents, played by Allison Hannigan and Ben Schwartz, who are in the process of, they're separated, and it's implied that they are considering divorcing. And her dad is he has been a comic book artist, but hasn't been able to get his work published, and is in kind of a period of depression, trying to figure out what to do with his life. Her mom is a romance novelist who is trying to work on her latest novel, but having some issues there. And Flora, who's a huge comic book fan, is kind of losing her ability to hope. She defines herself as a cynic. But hope kind of comes into their family in the form of Ulysses, who is this squirrel who gets sucked up into a neighbor's robot mower vacuum, I think, and comes out of it with some superpowers. And so Flora is kind of excited about the possibility of this and is trying to figure out what Ulysses' purpose as a hero might be. And it turns out that purpose is probably, maybe indirectly, but it does help in getting her family back together. She also has a very strange new friend living next door who is a temporarily blind young boy, who apparently is his blindness is psychosomatic, and we find out a little bit later as to why that is. That's a part of the story I was a little bit less clear on. Yeah, there are some elements of this movie that I think are cute. The squirrel is super adorable. The effects there I think are really good. That doesn't necessarily extend to some other computer animated parts of the film, but at least where it counts, I think it works well. And Flora herself, Matilda Lawler, is actually quite talented as well. She's super cute and plucky and fun. And yeah, I think there are some parts of it that I think are fun, but a lot of it is overshadowed by just random shoehorning. Well, not random, it's there for a reason, but a lot of shoehorning in of references to Marvel and Star Wars. I think just because Disney wants to make us aware that it has access to those properties. But it becomes a really a kind of a nuisance, basically, undercutting a lot of the more emotional moments of the film when it's kind of punctuated by a Marvel reference or having Ben Schwartz walk sadly away from his house and you can see a little Captain America shield painted on the corner of the house. Like it's not necessary. So that was one issue that I had with it.
You know what's so weird about that? I have to say is just like they have all these Marvel characters, but then his original characters stick out all the more.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it feels very tacked on. I'm also not a huge fan of William, the Benjamin Evan Ainsworth character, and his psychosomatic blindness, which
what the heck?
Yeah, it's very weird. It doesn't add.
What year is it?
I know it doesn't add a ton to the story. It feels very dated, and then when you find out the reason later on what his kind of personal mental trauma is, it's really dark. And it feels like it kind of comes out of nowhere. So all that is to say, I think there is some appeal there, but it feels like a Disney Channel movie with slightly more of a budget.
Feels like Will's gonna say it's not dark enough.
I agree with you in that, like, this is the film where I was kind of like, man, this is a little darker than I anticipated. Not like Timmy Failure level dark, where I feel like that film, it kind of fits because like the style of it is meant to be a little bit moody, but like this film, it's so like bright and beaming throughout, and then it'll just have like these weird like undercurrents of adult stuff or like adult themes that just, it feels more out of place or more jarring because they go so against the tone of the film otherwise, which is, like this like, upbeat kind of goofy squirrel movie, and then it's like these serious elements are trying to be infused inside. It's an odd little mix of a film, I have to agree.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know. It's not that it's a bad idea for a movie. It's just that it's a bad idea. Okay, a superpowered squirrel who also writes poetry. Like, what is that?
I mean,
like,
to be fair, I've heard the book is good. Like, I've heard it works on the page, but I haven't read the book myself. But
it makes me wonder why.
Yeah.
It just feels like a lot of random stuff thrown together, kind of like what Abby was saying. Yeah, I was really bummed out by this because there's obviously good stuff in here. Particularly, I really like Danny Pudi and Kate Micucci's thing. I think like there's another version of this movie where we kind of just followed Danny Pudi as this like animal control. He was like, resigned in disgrace, and now he needs to like capture this superpowered squirrel in order to, a little bit of a Caddyshack thing maybe. Those were some where like little laughs came in. And it's weird because I don't even dislike anybody in here besides the blind thing. I agree. I think Matilda Lawler is just like this really fun kid. She has a lot of energy. When she has like her little catchphrases of like wholly unexpected thing that happened. It's cute and it's fun. It's nice for a movie like this. And I think Allison Hannigan and Ben Schwartz work really well as her parents. I think that they're definitely like fitting well into these roles. There's warmth there. I felt for them. I really like it's weird and it definitely felt out of place, but I really like the whole scene where Ben Schwartz is just listening to Tom Jones, like in his workplace and just having fun. I was like, man, yeah, this is fun. This is cool. It's just like all this squirrel stuff and the plot is just very dumb. Like none of it really makes sense to me. And it just doesn't fit into a movie that I think could have been a lot better. But we can do general thoughts, I guess.
Yeah, I'm kind of two minds in terms of like other movies that have done this well. I feel like there's a throwback here to like kind of very weird animal centric films from like the 80s and 90s. Like there's kind of a Harry and the Hendersons vibe here too, which is, I mean, not bad. I think those are movies where some of those same characters exist and exist more effectively. I think there are also movies that have cute animated characters in them and manage to illuminate more serious issues. Like the Paddington movies is a perfect example, not to bring everything back to like two of my favorite movies in the world, but that is a movie that or both of those are movies that manage to balance individual characters' personal growth with a character who brings joy and magic into the world. And so there are also just like really good masterclasses in how to write characters like this efficiently. So I think part of the frustration there is that there are examples of this that are good. It's not necessarily like this was an insane hurdle to leap. It just feels like the effort wasn't there.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to agree with you. I think that's the case. And yeah, Will, you haven't talked too much yet. I know that your expectations were kind of like Timmy Failure, maybe not like the same level as that movie, but it sounded like you were hoping this would be on that level. But yeah, it doesn't sound like that happened for you.
Yeah, I mean, we friend of the show, Charlie Ridgely, I guess, gave us a false hope in thinking that this movie was as good, if not better, than Timmy Failure. Mistakes
Don't
were
throw
made.
Charlie under the bus. Come on.
You're the one that told me this. I mean, I'm just saying that like he was the one that kind of, and I'm just saying I'm not trying to throw him on the bus. Rather, I'm saying if you like the film, check out his review or his thoughts on it, because I'm sure they'll echo yours. I'm if anything, I'm trying not to be too negative, because I want to give him a spotlight to share whatever he felt was worthy of the film. But I'm just saying that I guess he felt that this movie was of a similar vein or of a similar caliber. And I just think it's not. Like, I think it's trying to be something different, but also kind of trying to be the same thing. And it's weird, because like it has kind of like a similar kind of dark humor and kind of like a moodiness or a stylistic choice to it that feels like it's kind of in that vein at the beginning of the film. But then, like Abby was mentioning, like it favors being more of like a high budget Disney Channel movie for the majority of it, which is, it's just like this kind of odd, like, yin and yang feel to it that just doesn't really, I think, come together in a way that feels super effective. And I'm not 100% sure why that is, because like you're saying, John, I think the cast primarily here is good. Like I do agree that the lead here, Matilda Lawyer, is a good, little way to like get us into this odd story, and her enthusiasm for this character and the story that's telling. I think it makes it a little bit more endearing than it might have been otherwise. And I will say she looks quite a bit like Allison Hannigan, to the point where I looked up to make sure she wasn't actually her real daughter in real life, because I do think they share a similar look, which I think, from a casting standpoint was...
I don't see that.
Really? I don't know. I thought, at least in some scenes, I was like, they look like I could believe that was her daughter, but you disagree?
I mean, I can believe. Oh, not in real life. I would never. I don't know what you're saying there, but I mean, I'm not a biologist.
I don't know. I mean, maybe if I rewatch a film and I didn't see that, I don't know. But I will say, I think casting wise, it is weird. They have like some high caliber people that don't really get utilized. In addition to all the DuckTales people we mentioned, there's also Gina Garofalo, who's like, a cameo. And I thought she was going to play a bigger part in this, and then she just disappears for the rest of the film, which I thought was odd. And then, similarly, Nancy Robertson is also here for like 2 minutes and then disappears, which I thought that was also...
Yeah, and Bobby Moynihan has...
Yeah, Bobby Moynihan, yeah. I mean, they keep like, like they have like these high caliber people in these very minor roles. And I'm like, are they going to play a bigger part at the end? And for the most part, they don't, which is very odd. But I mean, I think by and large, it's just a mostly mediocre Disney Plus movie. Like, I don't think it really warrants that much disdain or firm criticism. I just think there's an appealing film here that could have been realized and just for the most part didn't. But at the same time, it's not mean spirited. It's not, horribly made or anything. It just kind of comes as a shrug, I think, by and large.
Yeah, it's harmless. I think for me too, like, my two main criticisms is because like I think a lot of the film would have been fine if it had just gotten these two things right. Then I think everything else would have been way more enjoyable for me. First of all, it's supposed to be like a superhero squirrel movie, but it never really becomes that. Like, it just never really, like, story-wise, it just never really fully tilts into what if a squirrel had superpowers. It just kind of is an incidental thing that this squirrel can sometimes do somewhat super powerful things. And it takes a while for it to really manifest, and to the point where I was like, what's the point of it? Like, it doesn't really serve the story at all. It's like, you don't even need the squirrel to have superpowers. It can just be like a quirky squirrel that the family like starts to love. I don't know. And then also, I just don't get Flora. Like, she was a very confusingly written character. I think Matilda Lawler is like doing a great job of like bringing a lot of energy and fun to her, but like she keeps saying things like, I'm cynical, I'm a cynic. And like, she has this like mentality that is very like, not very personable, but then like, that's not really what the character is, because she is pretty personable. She's not cynical at all. And I wasn't sure if like the point was she thinks she's cynical. If that's the case, it doesn't come through at all. I don't know. The character didn't make sense to me, like writing wise.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I kept imagining like Flora trying to sit at the same lunch table as Timmy Failure and like trying to like, have his energy and stuff. And he like has these like candy cigarettes. It's like, you don't want this kid. Just get out of here.
Abby, did you see Timmy Failure?
I have not, but now I really want to. So he had candy cigarettes?
I'm
he's just very hard boiled.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. He's got a chip on his shoulder that feels a little bit more sincere. Like I think Timmy Failure has seen some things in life, and I think Flora is just mimicking what she read in a book.
Yeah.
I think
Timmy
that's Failure.
Yeah. That's I think the case is that she thinks that she is, which is, I mean, I can kind of see where like that's sort of cute in that like she thinks she's, strong and cynical and sees the world for what it is. But that also means that her character doesn't have that much of an arc. I feel like she never really has, like, she doesn't necessarily seem to have lost this optimism that she claims to have lost. And so there's not really much that's gained back for her. So it in terms of character journey, it doesn't really go anywhere.
I think that's exactly right. Yeah, that's how I feel too. I'll just say final grade, final thought. It's harmless. It's fine. It's a C+. I think for some people it'll be more like a B-. It's like in that zone. I think that like if it's as a family film, it's definitely going to work for some kids and everything. It's just not like it's not the kind of thing that I readily recommend to parents necessarily, because I think there's like way better fare for them to get into. So yeah, just a pretty disappointing C+ for me. Not terrible or anything, but definitely not at its potential. More disappointing than anything else. What about you, Abby?
Yeah, I think I'm in C territory as well. I would give this just a straight up C. I could see C. That like I might have enjoyed this as a younger kid if I were around Flora's age. That like I would probably have gotten into this and not really been too bothered by the issues that bug me as an adult. I agree that it's fairly harmless in that regard. If you're into Disney Channel movies and don't necessarily care about some of the nuts and bolts quality of it, this might be something that you really enjoy. But yeah, I think it fell sort of short as an original offering that really stands out and is worthy of high recommendation.
All right. And then Will Ashton, you get the last word on this one. Yeah.
I guess I'm not too far from where you are, but my grade was ultimately a little bit lower. I gave this one a C just because I admire what it's doing. I think I actually find the material, I think, a little bit more enjoyable or a little bit more winsome than you're suggesting, but I just don't think the movie really comes together in a way that warrants that. Like I said, I haven't read the book, but from what I can tell, it is a pretty charming source material, and I could see it being a fun movie otherwise, but even though the cast
do a live reading next week if you want.
Sure. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think the cast does what they can. I don't think the approach is bad necessarily. It just feels like kind of different. It feels like a bunch of different odds that are not really connecting together in a way that's disappointing. Like we said, like I think there's better stuff on Disney Plus outside of just the Disney canon, like some of their originals. I think a little bit better overall. And this one just kind of came as a fairly mediocre effort. So, a high C, nothing terrible, not something I'm going to be mad about later on, but for what it was, it could have been a lot better.
All right. Well, like I said before, Flora and Ulysses, you can watch right now on Disney. Plus, it's only 95 minutes long, shortest film we talked about this week. All right, and that'll do it for this episode of Cinemaholics. Thank you so much for listening. Keep your ears peeled for our extra milestone coming later this week. But for now, Abby Olchesi, what have you got going on this week that you might want to plug?
Sure. I just last week had an essay go up on RogerEbert.com. I mentioned earlier I wrote about The Straight Story, the David Lynch movie. So that is up there if you want to check it out. I have a full review of I Care a Lot on Crooked Marquee currently, and I will have a full review of Minari on the website later this week in advance of its VOD release. So that's a thing you can look forward to.
Sounds good. For me, as usual, you can find all three of us on Twitter. Our Twitter profiles are in the show notes as usual. For me, I have a review of Silk Road on Awards Watch right now. My review of Behind Her Eyes is also going to be coming to Awards Watch today or tomorrow, depending on when you listen to this. So it'll probably be live by the time you listen to this. And then I think I wrote another review for something somewhere, but I'm blanking. Violent Heart. I don't think Violent Heart review is up yet, but again, it should be up by the time you listen to this. That's going to be on The Young Folks. So yeah, if you're curious about those movies, you want more detail on them, you can find them there. And then Will Ashton, what about you?
I just have, my general stuff at Cinema Blend. You can check that out if you want to read some more of my stuff, though. I'll also, recommend Abby's thing because I'm a big fan of David Lynch, and I'm really excited to check out her article about The Straight Story. And I think that film, I haven't seen that one specifically, but I imagine it would probably pair pretty well with Minari. Maybe Abby can,
Yeah, it would be a good matchup. And also a good double feature with Nomadland, which is on Hulu currently.
Yeah, so there you go. All the more reasons to check out both her article and the film. So there you go.
It would be so fun if one day we could do like a whole David Lynch series, you know? I feel like we could have so many fun conversations, but maybe someday. Maybe that's in the cards. But okay, as far as this week's goes, we are all done. Thanks as always for checking out this show. We'll see you all next week from the Internet, California. I am John Negroni.
From Pennsylvania, I'm Washington.
From the Internet Kansas City, I'm Abby Olchesi.
See you next time.